Hello, I'm Perrin Beatty, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to the Business of Business. The series of conversations is designed to help to inform Canadian businesses about the impacts on Canadian society and Canadian business of the pandemic of COVID-19. We're very fortunate today to have a very distinguished Canadian leader, the Honourable Marco Mendicino, who is Canada's Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. By training, Minister Mendicino is a lawyer. He is an accomplished pianist, which is an added skill, always good in politics to have something to fall back on. And he's someone who has been a member of Parliament for Eglinton Lawrence in Toronto since 2015. Minister, thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted to have you.
Great to be with you, Perrin.
Last time you and I talked was before we had heard about COVID-19 arriving in Canada, and we were talking about levels of immigration and how Canadian businesses could find the workers they needed in an environment where labor was exceptionally tight. Things have changed dramatically since then. Tell us about your department, how it's functioned during the crisis to date, and how this has changed the way in which we've looked at the issue of immigration during this time.
Well, I remember that conversation when it was literally before the world begun to change very abruptly with the arrival of COVID-19. And although we've had to shift our priorities, I firmly believe that immigration is going to continue to be a great economic driver. And that's something that I hope to expand on throughout the course of our interview. But let me just pause to thank a few people that are really helping Canada respond to COVID-19. First and foremost, our health workers, our temporary workers who are on the farms and helping Canadians continue to have access to health and safe food. And I know that's something else we're going to get into. But I also want to take a moment to thank you, Perrin, and the Chamber for its leadership, as well as Canadian businesses, both small, medium, and large. We know that businesses are continuing to play an important role by providing work and employment and wages throughout this pandemic. And it goes without saying that we are going to need businesses to drive that economic prosperity going forward. The innovation, the entrepreneurialism, the risk-taking that you and your members show day in and day out is, I think, a source of great optimism and hope and confidence. And I'm looking forward to working with you as we navigate and flatten the curve and begin to spark that recovery. But to come back to your question about what it is that we've done, in the short term, we have moved very quickly to transform the way that we're doing business. So a lot more digital presence. Our employees and our public servants are working remotely from home, as you're seeing in the private sector. And that is allowing us to do work in the short term, like, as I said, bring in temporary foreign workers, particularly in the agricultural sector, in a safe and orderly manner, so that we can keep that food supply chain going. We've also put a lot of emphasis on continuing to welcome international students, because they're a huge economic boost to the economy. Over $21 billion every year. We're talking about the best and the brightest who are taking degrees in health and innovation, and most importantly, in the short term, again, personal support. So what we've done is we've actually put a greater priority on seeing those types of visitors come to Canada, put their shoulder to the wheel, contribute to the response to COVID-19, while at the same time continuing to land immigrants in spite of all of the challenges. And I firmly believe, when you look at the lessons of history, that we have survived pandemics and war and conflict and depression, and there's always been a positive trend towards immigration throughout.
Can I pick up on one of the comments you were making about international students? Obviously, community colleges and universities are planning now for the fall. Many of them are talking about going to virtual classrooms as opposed to having people physically in place. Is it too early to make any sort of estimate as to what's going to happen to the flow of international students coming into Canada, who are so critical for the financial support of our post-secondary institutions and of many of the communities in which they operate?
Well, I just want to highlight again the importance of the international student program. It is a significant contributor to the economy. As I said, over $21.6 billion each year. I've had very constructive conversations with universities and colleges about their desire to see international students continue to come to Canada. We're a huge draw. We've got one of the best, if not the best, post-secondary academic sectors in the world. What we have done in response to the feedback that we've gotten is we've made some modifications to the way we're administering the program. So we've created some additional flexibility around postgraduate work so that if you're here and you're taking a degree in medicine or in nursing, or you're taking a diploma in personal support care, you are able now to work over and above the 21-hour per week usual cap, so that the frontline healthcare workers who are working around the clock to save lives have those additional hands on deck. We've also allowed for some greater flexibility when it comes to taking courses online. Throughout the pandemic, campuses have remained closed to ensure that we are physically distancing to limit the spread of COVID-19. And so we've leveraged technology and innovation in partnership with both the post-secondary sector as well as our partners provincially, to allow students to continue to take their courses online, both here as well as abroad. And so we're continuing to plan for the remainder of 2020. And I'm looking forward to collaborating with all of our partners in the space, because we know that the International Students Program is such a huge economic driver. And they also add to this great country and our social fabric.
You also mentioned temporary foreign workers. We're into planting season now and the early stages of this year's crop. And concerns have been expressed across the country by Canadian farmers and others about the challenges of having a workforce to be able to ensure that crops are planted, that they're tended to, and ultimately taken off. How is the temporary foreign workers program adapted as a result of the changes caused by COVID-19?
Well, I'd like to say that we've adapted very well, and this is one of the great successes during our management in the response to COVID-19. Right from the outset, my department at Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada has shown great leadership in carving out a targeted exemption to the travel restrictions which are in place to stop the spread of COVID-19 for temporary foreign workers. The main objective there was to allow for a pathway for those workers who come back year in and year out, who work on our farms, who work at all stages of the food supply chain, at our food processing plants, to come back in, but obviously in a way that is safe and guarantees the health of Canadians. So for those that are coming back, they do have to abide by the 14-day mandatory isolation period. Importantly, we've provided financial aid to farmers and seafood workers and employers to allow for the accommodations and the lodging to ensure that physical distancing is in place. And as a result of all those initiatives, we now have made very significant progress in welcoming those workers back to our farms. So we've got upwards of about 35,000 total in the agri-food sector who have been approved, the majority of which, I would say roughly 30,000 or so, who are here and starting to plant and seed, which is very good. And we're working very closely with our partners in the source countries, as well as provincially right across the country, to ensure the smooth flow continues, because this is a critical time of year, probably the most important time of year to keep the crops going. And that success will continue because we know how important the work is, and the value of that work is in maintaining food security for all Canadians.
As you do this, you obviously have to work very closely, as you mentioned, with provincial governments. How have you found that collaboration? My understanding is that it's varied from province to province in terms of how they viewed the entry of temporary foreign workers.
I would say by and large, it's been exceptional, and that the dialogue that I have with my provincial counterparts across the country is born out of an understanding and a shared belief in the importance of bringing in migrant workers, again, in a very safe and orderly fashion, to work on those farms. And, you know, as I alluded to earlier, there's a real relationship that is developed between the workers and their employers and their co-workers, and they establish a connection to Canada over the time in which they come. And that's one of the reasons why we've just launched an Agrifood pilot that provides for a way in which these workers to establish a permanent residency in Canada, something that I believe that is supported right across the country by our provinces. We've also, Perrin, set up dedicated Tiger teams. These are teams that are looking at ways to reduce the time that it takes to approve the visas and the work permits, to work through those issues in cases where, let's say, a worker may have lost their job due to COVID-19, to allow them to stay in Canada and get that next job and start planning and seeding with as little disruption as possible. That's work that I'm doing in conjunction with my colleagues, Ministers Bibeau and Paltrow and Jordan. And as a result of the coordination in this space, I think we've seen a lot of success thus far. I mean, there's been some concerns expressed at different points, but we've really turned things around and have seen a good ongoing smooth flow of workers in this space, which is allowing us to shore up our food supply chain and guarantee that Canadians have access to healthy, safe, and affordable food.
And it is absolutely critical that we ensure that there's a Canadian food supply here and that the Canadian harvest is able to be brought to market. And without it, there's no question, without the support of temporary foreign workers, it would not be possible to do. So they're a critical part of the production chain. When you and I last spoke, it was just before you made the announcement of the immigration targets for Canada. And the Canadian Chamber was very supportive of the targets you were setting and believes that immigration is absolutely critical to growth in our economy and to having a healthy, evolving society in Canada. But things have changed dramatically since the advent of COVID-19. What sort of impact has this had in terms of the targets that you've set for this year for immigration?
Well, first and foremost, we've got a plan that's in place. It's very transparent. It's a 3-year plan, so it's not just about how we do in 2020. It's also one that is forward-looking into 2021 and 2022. And I want to begin by reiterating what I said at the outset, which is that immigration is not only a vital lifeline during the pandemic to allow us to continue to get access to healthy and affordable food and to shore up support in our hospitals and elsewhere in the personal support care sector. It's also going to continue to drive economic prosperity and jobs growth in the future. And there are just a couple of anecdotes that I want to share with you. I mean, I've worked very closely with businesses both in my riding and across the country and in partnership with the Chamber. And what I hear from you and your leaders is we need immigration. And that the question is not whether or not we should continue to immigrate, but how we immigrate. And that's an important conversation that we are going to continue to have as we navigate and flatten the curve. But there can be no doubt in my mind that immigrants who come to this country want to give, they want to contribute, they want to work hard, they want to build that next chapter in their life. As you recently tweeted out, in your own heritage, in your own family's history. I think I firmly believe that Canadians relate to immigration in their own stories the way that you and I do, Perrin. And so that fundamental value will endure as we make our way over the curve and into the next very prosperous stage of our history.
And I certainly share your feeling that Canada's been enriched by generations of immigrants who have come to Canada, who've brought their skills and their desire to have a better life for themselves and for their families, and who've helped to create a better life for all of us. Inevitably, even before this, there was a debate about immigration, about numbers and about the scope of immigration, the contribution made by immigrants. And you and I are very much of the same view about the importance of immigration. But one can expect, with the fact that we've moved from a society in which we had record low unemployment to seeing record high unemployment just a few weeks later, that people will be debating levels and the appropriateness of immigration at this time and whether or not immigrants are taking jobs from Canadians. How do you respond to the concerns that are being raised by many Canadians about that?
It's a really good question, and I want to begin by really empathizing with Canadians and businesses who are struggling right now and who may have lost a job or who are considering how it is that they're going to keep their businesses alive. And that's one of the reasons why our government has introduced the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, many of the other initiatives which we put into place to help businesses endure this very challenging period around business loans with some forgiveness and tax deferrals, and rent relief. We are really expending every effort to try and support businesses and workers through this very challenging period. And I'm confident that we are going to bridge over this and begin a new and prosperous chapter, thanks in large part to the entrepreneurialism and the spirit of taking that risk and going out there and starting a new business. That will be the great economic driver and of our prosperity going forward. But I also want to say that we know from the lessons of history that there has always been a positive trend towards immigration because it is an economic driver, because those who come here are actually able to contribute their ideas and their innovation in a way that allows us to grow our economy. And so I firmly believe that this is an important debate, that we do need to always look at where our needs are in our economy, try and ensure that Canadians have the chance to seize those opportunities, whether it's through work or by starting a business, and where we can't, to look beyond for those who share our value, who share that sense of wanting to add to this country in a way that is constructive and prosperous. And that's immigration. I mean, immigration is fundamentally about people coming together to build stronger communities and a stronger country. And that is synonymous with business. It's synonymous with entrepreneurialism. And it has historically been a great draw. And I believe that it will continue to be an important draw going forward. And that's something that I'm very excited to do in partnership with business leaders, big and small, right across this country, including the Chamber.
One of the key issues now, we're starting to see decontrol take place region by region or province by province. People starting to come back to work, but it'll be a slow process, a slow reopening of the economy, and the focus is going to be on growth. But you and I have both been concerned about inclusive growth. How do we ensure that the benefits are fairly shared across our economy? Historically, new Canadians have paid a penalty in coming to Canada, that their incomes are lower, their job status is lower than people who, with comparable education and comparable training in Canada, comparable experience. How do we ensure that as we grow our way back out of COVID-19, that we also have inclusive growth?
Well, again, you raise a really important issue. And one of the ways that we start to shrink that wage gap that you referred to is by moving newcomers along their journey from temporary status to permanent residency to citizenship. And as they achieve that final step, we see that gap closes, which is, I got to tell you, in the job, there are many very unique privileges that I get to see day in and day out. But probably the most special one is participating in a citizenship ceremony and just seeing the look in the eyes of people as you welcome them into the Canadian family, the culmination of the work, the coming to get to know the community, the country, the understanding of the history, the hope and the optimism that you see in their eyes at that moment, I think is far and away just one of the most special things that I get to do. And importantly, it adds to their ability to compete and to drive towards prosperity. And so I think that's one way, is certainly moving them along that journey. But I also think that, we in government have always looked at society and tried to find ways to drive growth from the middle end. And so we have looked at ensuring that there are tax incentives and breaks for hardworking Canadians and Canadian families, to look at ways to support and partner with business, in particular small business. As you know, one of the ways in which we set off as a government was to reduce the tax rate for small businesses so that it's among the lowest, if not the lowest, in the G7. If we are setting the conditions correctly for businesses to be successful, to thrive, and to grow, then that's going to allow them to offer really, I think, competitive jobs to both Canadians in the first instance, but also to newcomers at a competitive wage. And certainly the policies that we put into place, I think, will continue on that trajectory.
Let's turn for a minute to refugees. You're also the minister responsible for Canada's refugee program. How has our acceptance of refugees and the targets that we've set for ourselves being changed by the pandemic?
Well, first and foremost, this pandemic has reminded us all that refugees give back. We tend to think of refugees as being displaced and vulnerable because of conflict and war and increasingly climate change, and that's true. But the refugees and the asylum seekers that come to Canada are rolling up their sleeves and are finding ways to contribute. And you're seeing this in truly compelling stories from coast to coast. There's refugee family out in British Columbia who's going out now and shopping for groceries and food and bringing it back to the family that sponsored them. In Quebec, we're seeing asylum seekers who have not yet had their final status determined, who are, lending an incredibly important helping hand on the front lines of our hospitals and our retirement homes, where COVID has hit fast and hard. And it is just painstaking to see the stories of seniors who need the help and the treatment and the health care, and to see asylum seekers step up and to truly fill in the lines and the shifts when our first responders have become exhausted is truly moving. And what it should do is it should remind all Canadians that this is a country that is compassionate, that believes in doing the right thing, that believes in welcoming refugees and asylum seekers so that they can start that next chapter in their life. And so I believe that refugees and asylum seekers will continue to find a safe harbor in Canada. How we do that in a COVID era, in a post-COVID era, is very important. And so the restrictions that we have in place around the border are meant to stop the spread of COVID-19, but we continue to ensure that those who are truly in urgent circumstances are able to find a pathway to resettle in Canada, allowing them the opportunity to contribute in the ways that I've described. And I just have to say, having traveled around the world, people look to Canada as a leader in it. I mean, there's a great guy by the name of Mustafa Ayello, who is a Syrian refugee who's now resettled in Canada. And he started a company called Jumpstart. And the whole point of this program, of this business, is to create opportunities for new refugees, new asylum seekers to start their own companies and their own businesses. And I imagine that many of them will one day be part of the chamber and will be able to share those stories with you, Perrin, and with all of your members in a way that really reminds us all and reaffirms our belief that this is the right thing to do.
Let's turn for a minute to how you're functioning during the pandemic. You're a member of Parliament for Toronto, but your job is in Ottawa. You have a department to run. You have constituents to serve. How are you organizing yourself now with the pandemic on?
Well, you mentioned piano at the outset in your introduction, and I do go back to the piano often as a way of really decompressing and finding that healthy space that I know that we all need to find in these very trying times. But I'm very fortunate. We're all here in my home. You're now looking at the proverbial bookcase in the background. This is my basement space. My wife has commandeered the master bedroom as her office. She works in the financial sector. And my two girls, both of whom are still in grade school, have commandeered the dining room table, which doubles as their classroom. We're doing fine. I'm much more worried about Canadians. I'm worried about ensuring that I stay motivated to contribute to a government that wants to provide relief and support as much as possible to those who have lost their jobs or who are struggling to keep their jobs, and importantly, to continue to provide support to businesses. And I believe that when we are at our best, there is a very natural equilibrium that exists between government and business, that there is a partnership that is based and founded on a constructive dialogue that recognizes that businesses have an incredibly important role to play in allowing us to rebound and recover. And that's work that inspires me. That's work that motivates me. And, we're going to continue to have a lot of work to do before we get back there, but I'm very confident and very optimistic because of the resilience of Canadian businesses that we are going to bounce back stronger and better than we ever have been before.
Now, you're running a large and important department of government, but doing it remotely. How do you manage to do that?
Same way you and I are talking right now, remotely, using technology. And I would say that by and large, that the transition has been pretty seamless. It's never a complete substitute for being in Ottawa in person. And there have been a number of occasions where I've had to travel back to be there in person for a number of meetings. But I'm trying to follow the advice as best as I can, and staying pretty local. And as a result of being set up with all the equipment and the tools that I need, I'm able to communicate with my deputy minister and her team, as well as my team remotely. And I would encourage, Canadians and businesses to leverage the same technologies that are there. In particular, some of the local businesses that I have developed a relationship with are doing very well, notwithstanding the challenging period, because they've managed to stay in touch with their customers and their clients through technology. So it's a theme that I've seen run pretty consistently in Canada's response to COVID-19. And it's one of the reasons why I feel like thus far we've managed to respond fairly effectively, and we will continue to do so going forward.
And I know you take your responsibilities as a member of Parliament very seriously as well. I know your constituency. I went to high school there many
which
years
high
ago.
school?
I went to UCC in your constituency.
Oh, great.
And actually got my start in politics while I was there at high school in that constituency. But I know you take it very seriously, enormous challenges in meeting your constituents and dealing with their concerns. How do you manage to do that during the pandemic with lockdown?
Well, staying connected through COVID is super important to me. I have always, one of the reasons why I got into politics is that I like being around people. I like interacting. And certainly, in the COVID era, we've had to find new ways to stay connected and keep that relationship close. I just did a teletown hall with two of my colleagues, Minister Carolyn Bennett and my friend and colleague, MP Rob Oliphant, where we had at one point, I think, close to 20,000 constituents from all three constituencies on the line. And we talked about the work that we are doing. And we also took questions. So we will continue to leverage technology in ways that will allow me to remain connected. And I think over time, as we responsibly and thoughtfully look at ways to get back out into the community, we will see people in person. I still go to visit a number of the local businesses that I support. I put the mask on and, wear gloves and keep distance. And those are just some of the common sense things that I hope that all Canadians are doing. So there's a combination and a mixture of technology with using some of the practices that our public healthcare experts have asked us to abide by as a way of staying connected in the riding.
Minister, thank you very much for your important work on behalf of Canadians, and thank you so much for finding time to be with us today.